Hey guys, so I've been working on a cold lightning hybrid sorceress, and I think I've come up with something very cool that I wanted to share with you all. If you want to permafreeze your enemies and stomp them to death with lightning, then this is the build for you. With excellent crowd control, shop application, mobility, and the potential to scale damage far beyond what I will demonstrate in this initial video, I'm very excited to share with you the Cryo-Shock Telestomp Stormweaver. Let's get into the build. Alright guys, so I just want to run through a leveling strategy for this build, and this planner is mostly in line with it, but I would absolutely check out in the description the Mobilityx build planner. This has a step-by-step guide on which nodes I would take whilst leveling up, and this would help you a lot, but you can also experiment and try what you like. So I'm just going to quickly rush through and in no particular order, just go through the sort of sensible nodes you want to aim for in which order, but check out that build planner in the description, guys, and that will help you. So to start with, we're just going to go up the left here, go for raw power, mana regeneration on root, spell damage. Excellent. We're going to go straight up to Path of Winter, which gives us cold damage freeze build up. Afterwards, we're going to rush over here to open mind for mana regen and pure energy for maximum shield. And then we're going to take dampening shield as well, just for more energy shield. This is giving us defense and damage. Great. Next, we're going to move up here and we're going to track off and we're going to grab exploit the elements. This is going to give us a bunch of damage we should be able to apply on ailments. And then early on, it's not in this particular show right now, but I would take the Breath of Ice track here just for some resistance penetration early on to make sure if you run into any cold resistance mobs, you can deal with them. Once you've done this, the next thing you want to do is you want to rush straight up to the outwards cold node cluster, and you want to take Glaciation, Endless Blizzard, and Inescapable Cold. You can come back for Chill to the Bone later on, but you want to get those three. And to do that, you can unspec the Exploit the Elements and the Breath of Ice track, and just come back here, take those nodes out, and run straight up the middle into here. That should just about get you there, and those are very powerful up the top, giving you +1 to all skills and so on. And then you can come back later on for Exploit the Elements when you feel like it. After this, you want to rush to the right over here. You want to grab Patient Barrier for energy shield, Ingenuity for a huge amount of intelligence, which gives you mana, raw mana for more mana here. You want to grab Arcane Intensity for huge spell damage increase by scaling with your mana, and then Ether Flow for a massive amount of regeneration whilst running. This is all just super handy. And whilst you're over here, you probably should grab Forthcoming as well. This will just give you greater cooldown recovery on your skills, which is also very, very helpful. After this, you're probably going to want to scale your defenses a little bit. So you can come over here to the left Enhanced Barrier for more energy shield and max resists. You can come down here for Melding, which is more maximum energy shield in whilst giving up some mana. And you can also come over here for Calibration for more energy shield and mana as well. And there's also this node down here, Heavy Buffer, which is more energy shield and life it gives you more maximum energy shield, but costs you life. All of those will scale your energy shield. You can possibly come back for calibration much later on, but I would take the other three first, just to make sure you've got some defense going on. Next thing you want to do is go for the mana damage reduction nodes. So you want to come over here to Adverse Growth, going up here, so some of your damage goes to your mana before life. Then you also want to come over here, grab Mental Perseverance for more mana damage reduction, and then you want to come down here for Lucidity for more mana damage reduction. All those will just help you sustain and not get one shot on your life, as long as you've got enough mana regen. Next thing, I would go for scaling your damage. So you can come down here for Thin Ice and Heavy Frost for a huge amount of frozen damage, frozen enemy damage and resist ignores, so that's super helpful. You can come down here for Potent Incantation for huge spell damage increase at the cost of 5% spell cast speed. So if you've come over here and already taken Casting Cascades, that will give you enough cast speed so you could then take Potent Incantation, and between them that will scale your damage hugely. You can come back and take Exploit the Elements. You could come over here and take Echoing Frost and Echoing Thunder. All of those will scale your damage. And then a cherry on the cake, you've got Climate Change giving you extra fire damage, scaling on your cold damage, and you've got Overexposure, which scales your exposure effects, which Frost Bomb will do. So all of those will give you more damage. You can take them in any order you like, but the build planner has got them in an order that I would prefer. And if you're really feeling ambitious, you've got these two here as well, Storm Charged and All Natural, which also scale your elemental damage, but they're a bit further out. Beyond this, there's really only the cursed stuff left, a bit of utility and the cursed nodes in green. So you won't really need to take these nodes in green unless you're really going with this until late game, which to be honest, you should then be probably looking at the endgame variants. As for Ascendancies, I would absolutely take the Arcane Surge route down here. That gives you 10% cast speed at base and 20% mana regeneration at base, and you can scale the arcane effects up by 1% per 15 mana, maximum mana you've got, and you get 70% from it up here at Touch the Arcane. So overall, you can easily get 400-500% effects in your Arcane Surge on this build with relative ease by the end game, and that just gives you huge amounts of cast speed and mana regen for free. So I would absolutely take this track first. If you get your 6th and 8th points, you can play around putting them wherever you like. And also feel free to take anything but the Arcane Surge. But I feel like leveling up Arcane Surge is the most reliable and the most useful tool to you, because you're struggling to get the cast speeds you want at that point and mana regeneration. So they're both just super handy to you. As for the leveling skills, if you come into the build planner, as you can see here on the screen, I've got in the how it works section. It tells you the starter skills. So Firebolt, Spark, Freezing Shards, and Flame Wall, they're all relatively decent to start on. Spark with Flame Wall works very well, as demonstrated in this little clip here. It picks up the fire as the sparks go through it, and that will just give you double damage to enemies it hits. You can also pick up Cold Snap, Frost Bomb, and Ice Nova very early on. These are all very useful as well. Ice Nova's good because you can cast it on your Frostbolts, which you're going to pick up later on. Frostbolt is going to be your bread and butter skill throughout this build for applying freeze. The ability to cast the Ice Nova and Cold Snap on the Frostbolts means you can stay at range from enemies whilst also applying them, and these are also demonstrated in clips here. Beyond this, I would recommend reading down the skill gem section here, which goes through all the skills and why they've been taken and what they're doing and what the supports are particularly useful to them. But a quick overview here is Frostbolt is our bread and butter, as we said. Frostbomb is very good for AoE, clearance, and bossing very early on. I absolutely smashed Axe 1 with this skill. Frostball is very good for defensive and offensive utility. You can block enemies off, but you can also plant it underneath big targets' enemies' feet for big damage. And it can also be used for mana regeneration with Font of Mana. Hypothermia is very good as a curse to reduce the enemy's cold resistance. This is exceptionally good early on for beating anything that you run into with cold resistance and you don't have enough cold penetration to deal with it. Later on, you'll get Cast on Freeze, which, as everyone knows, was recently nerfed. This still works just fine with Cold Snap. You can make it work with Comet still, but you need to be very endgame with much more energy generation. So this isn't going to be good for leveling up. So I'd recommend Cold Snap in here until you can get Ball Lightning. And once you get Ball Lightning, this actually works very well in Cast on Freeze, as we'll demonstrate in the later on version of this build. So keep that in mind. Moving on, we've got Lightning Warp. Lightning Warp is very good for mobility, and also it just allows you to apply shock damage all over the place on enemies, and shock damage gives you extra damage against enemies. It's just an extra way of multiplying your damage. Super nice. And once you hit level 52, which is a bit later on to the mid-games, but you haven't quite finished the story, you'll pick up the skill Eye of Winter, which is pretty good for damage, but it's also a good way for applying extra critical hit damage for the rest of your skills, and it's extremely good for applying cold exposure later on when you can get the support gem Cold Exposure. And in terms of other spirit gems, Arctic Armor and Blasphemy are very good as well. Blasphemy I didn't really put on until I was in the endgame, because you need 120 maximum spirit or more. So you're probably looking at this in the endgame variant more. But if you do come across energy spirit-based items, you could absolutely put Blasphemy on with Enfeeble, which enables you to have a second curse, and this reduces the damage of enemies. Very useful. For a full rundown of all the skills and all the supports that you can use, you can also come to the skill gems section. This has all the skills here with supports in them. They're not all in the order you would have to take them, but what I've done is I've added a skill gem cutting priority, and this is in order priority from left to right. You can obviously use other stuff, but here you're just crafting these from left to right when you can and you hit the right tier. And it's the same for the support gems here as well. These are the ones you can get and roughly what importance they are. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Other useful ones you could use, but I'm not using right now. These ones I'm investigating, so don't worry about this. And your spirit gems as they become available as well. So this is here for your use as well, guys. In terms of equipment, guys, in the build planner, I've got a whole load of items here set up with loads of affixes on it. You're not going to find items with 5 or 6 affixes on it that are perfect as you go through. The idea here is to show affixes that would be useful to you as you go through. If you go just below here, it goes down in importance, roughly what mobility you'd want, offensive stats, defensive stats, and then there's a stats priority bullet point list, which you'll find useful. And this is in roughly order of importance from top to bottom. Absolutely priority one, and I cannot emphasize this enough, guys, movement speed. The earlier you get movement speed on your boots, the more fun you're going to have in this game. It will make you feel less sluggish, and it will make it easier for you to avoid mechanics and get away from swarms of enemies. Beyond this, anything like max life, max mana, very good for sustaining your cast and sustaining your life. Cast speed is very good on this build early on because it will allow you to cast faster and more often. If you're lucky enough to come across anything that's level to all cold spells or level to all spells, that's super nice. And I cannot emphasize enough how important elemental resistances are. Elemental resistances are very, very, very strong for defensive mechanics. If you do not have any elemental resistances, you will get one shot. So make sure you get some of those if you can. Beyond this, in the early to mid game, there's a few extra bits here you could get, such as Chaos Resistance, extra maximum shield, spirits, crit chance, crit damage, but these are all non-mandatory. They're just nice to haves, so keep an eye out on this. And an extra side note, if you're super, super lucky and you're able to find a life sprig wand as you go, this carried me all the way through the story almost to the end. This is extremely strong early on, so if you get one of these, happy days. And if you manage to pick up a Midnight Braid belt, you can go into the endgame variant much, much earlier than the end of the campaign, because this is very key for being able to do that, especially if you want to go the Mind Over Matter with Eldritch Battery route early on. But these are not mandatory. You can absolutely do it all without this. These are just if you are lucky enough to come across them. Okay, with the starter variant out of the way, guys, let's get into where I've got to with the endgame variant here. So I'm currently running at level 73, so I've got many, many passive points I haven't got yet, and I am still experimenting and playing around with this, so bear that in mind. This will probably change over time, but this is working quite well. I'm doing tier 4, tier 5 endgame mapping with this with relative ease. It's only poison damage that's causing me a problem right now, and that's purely because I'm not geared defensively enough for that. Once I do, it's blasting through the content at a reasonable speed. It's bossing I need to work on, but I think I know how to fix that. I just haven't got to that yet. So I'm just going to quickly run through the passives here, a bit like I did for the starter variant. I will be updating the build guide so that it will have a non-starter variant, so look out for that. That will also be in the same build guide in the links in the description, so make sure you check that out if you haven't already, guys. With that in mind, let's just quickly rattle through this. So some of this will be recognizable. We come straight up for raw power, again for spell damage and intelligence. We take open mind here for mana regeneration. We come up here for Path of Winter for the extra cold damage and the freeze build up, because that's very nice to us. And then we come up here and we're going to rush all the way up to the cold nodes as we did before, taking Glaciation, Endless Blizzard, and Inescapable Cold. So this is all relatively similar to what we did before. The only difference here is we haven't currently taken Exploit the Elements. We haven't taken any of the Penetration here because we don't need it anymore. And later on, we haven't taken anything to do with increased maximum energy shield. And I will get into that reasoning why soon, but there's a good reason why we're not taking this anymore. Beyond this, we're then going to again rush all the way over to the right here so that we can take all of these mana and intelligence nodes. Again, we need all of these in this build. The more mana we've got, the better. Mana in this build is scaling our defense and mana regeneration, it's scaling our cast speeds, and it's scaling our damage. It's our HP pool as well. So it's just, the more mana you've got, the better. I'm currently running 2,682. I'm going to be aiming to get this nearer to 4,000 or 5,000 because that's really where I need it to be to keep scaling this build up. Once you've taken all of these mana generation nodes, the next thing you want to do, once you've got 1,000 or more mana, you can rush over here from the middle all the way to the left again and take this mana damage recouped as mana node. The only difference here is you're going to take mana generation on the left, you're not going to take damage taken from mana from life. The reasoning for that is you are going to take the key passive here, Mind Over Matter. Mind Over Matter means all of your damage is taken from mana before life, but at the cost of 50% mana regeneration. So before you take Mind Over Matter, you really want to make sure you've got at least 1,000 mana, or at least 800 mana, and you also want to make sure you've got a fairly decent amount of mana recovery, because otherwise you're just going to end up dying very, very quickly here. And once you've taken this, if you do have over 1,000 mana and you've stacked enough energy shield elsewhere and your mana regeneration is decent, I would come down and take Eldritch Battery here. This converts all of your energy shield into mana. This is actually quite strong, but to make this work, you really do need a very good amount of mana regeneration and a very high mana pool, because once you take this, you no longer have energy shield. One thing to note, as I said before, increased energy shield nodes do not work with this. And the reason for that is this applies to energy shield after conversions. So your energy shield will convert to mana from your gear. And then this would then be applied to 0 because you no longer have any base energy shields. So you'd gain nothing from it. So this will only take the energy shield from your gear or other sources that adds to that initial calculation, mainly from your gear. Once you take this, you'll notice your mana goes up super high because it will take your energy into account. This scales your damage with Arcane Intensity. This will also scale your cast speed and mana generation with Arcane Surge, which we're also still taking here. So overall, you're just scaling many, many areas of your build. It's very, very strong. Beyond this, guys, to be honest, what I've done is I've gone all in on the projectile slows down and on the extra nodes here, which give you a chance for spells to fire 2 additional projectiles. I tested this out and it was surprisingly good. I'm using Frostbolt as almost pretty much just as a freeze applicator and the ability to blind enemies on demand. This gives you defensive capability because you're freezing and blinding them, but it also is the main trigger for spawning Ball Lightning. And Ball Lightning here is where we're getting a significant amount of our extra damage because we're going to go and just teleport around and stomp them all as shown in the videos throughout the video. If you take Psychic Fragmentation, all the small nodes, and you come up here and you turn the clock back on these 3 small nodes here, you get 50% chance for spell skills to fire 2 additional projectiles every time they're fired. This will affect your Ball Lightning. This will affect your Frostbolts. They're very nice. And if you've got this, plus the reduced projectile speed, support gem on Ball Lightning, or on Frostbolts, it will make your projectiles go particularly slow, which is very good because you want them to be slower. You want them to sit around so they can zap enemies as they go through them. You do get another 8% reduced projectile speed here as well. So overall, you'll end up getting your bolts going a lot slower, meaning they're zapping the enemies much more. Beyond this, most of the rest of the tree is recognizable. We go up here, we get the cooldown recovery rate still. We come over here, we grab Heavy Frost and Thin Ice still. I've also taken Harsh Winter because we want extra cast speeds, as we'll go into why. We've come over here to take Casting Cascade as well. That gives us massive extra cast speeds every time we cast a non-instant spell, which is most of them, at the cost of a bit of damage. I might play around with some different versions of this later on if I can get enough cast speed in my gear, but for now, this was very good until you can get to that point. And really, other than that, all I've done is I've come down here into Mana Blessing. It's a shame I have to waste a node here on Energy Shield stuff to get to it, but the 5% increased mana is really just too good to turn up. This just gives us loads of damage, loads of HP, loads of everything that scales with mana. And I'm slowly but surely working up here to Arcane Blossom because this is the only place on a tree you can get increased mana recovery. This will work with not just mana regeneration, but it will also work with your damage taken recouped as mana and your flasks. So it will just scale all of your mana recovery, which I think will be very strong, but we'll find out when I get there. The only other thing to note, because I've just baked it into the build and it seems very useful, is Whisper of Doom is also active as a key passive. And as we'll go through when we go through the gems, this allows me to have 2 curses on my builds, but at the cost of doubling the activation delay, which would make them very slow to activate, except I've got 2 ways to bypass activations altogether. So you've got one as an aura, and you've got one using a support gem that completely mitigates out the activation delay. So this, you're just getting the bonus of being able to have 2 curses without having any downside at all, which is very, very useful. There are many other nodes on here that would be very useful as I go on. I'm still trying to work out which ones I want to go for, but a few of note, because we're going into a Telestomp Lightning build, we could come up here for Pure Power, scaling lightning damage per 10 intelligence. There is a unique ring we can get, one of the Brotherhood rings, that would convert all lightning damage into cold. So if we took this up here, it would scale the intelligence, we'd convert it to cold, and that would end up scaling with all of our cold damage and all our cold modifiers. So we could do this. There's a node over here called Drenched, which will give us more lightning damage based as extra cold. Again, we can convert it. We've got all these elemental nodes over here, which we'll probably go back and take at some point, or at least 2 of them for extra damage. We've also got these 3 nodes over here, Echoing Frost, Echoing Thunder, and Echoing Flames. We could definitely take Echoing Frost and Thunder here, but if we came up here and took Climate Change, we'd get the extra freeze build up, additive fire damage based on our cold damage, and then we could take Echoing Flames because that would cause ignites. So there's many options here. We've also got Potent Incantation we could take, and we've also got Mental Alacrity over here. I'm probably going to come back up and take Invocated Efficiency eventually, because this, just for the mana regeneration, 3% of your maximum mana on every invoke will be very strong. The more mana you stack, the more you get. So there's a whole bunch of offensive options here we haven't taken. And not to mention the least, we've got Exploit the Elements, which were always affecting enemies with an elemental ailment. So we'd benefit from about 60% extra damage here as well. So there is plenty of offensive options in this build I haven't taken yet. I've just been trying to solve the mana regeneration and just work out what the build is looking like to make it more fluid before I start looking to scale the damage. So look out on the build guide as we go through. I will try out a whole bunch of things, and hopefully we'll be able to improve it further. As for the skills, again, I'm still playing around with these, but right now I'm using Frostbolt as our main freeze applicator. And the supports, just one thing to mention, all of my gems right now are only 3 support slots. Heavy, I haven't unlocked the 4th slot in any of these yet, so all of the footage you've seen is the build working with just 3 support gems. This would obviously be significantly stronger if I could get 4 or 5 slots for these, especially for the main damage skills. So for Frostbolt, we're taking Blind. This just means it's so easy to just hit everything on screen with this, with the way it's set up, that you're going to end up blinding just about everything on the screen. Wild Shards giving us the omnidirectional damage. This plays very well with the blind, means you can just apply chilled ground all over the place, and this is very good when you use Eye of Winter and all of the other skills later that play into it, and it just freezes things extremely fast. And to make it freeze things even quicker, we play taking Glaciation. That 50% extra freeze build up multiplicative is just huge. We're taking Frostbomb here. I really only use this on bosses, mainly for an extra way to do cold exposure, but also just for extra big damage when we do manage to lock down a boss. I'm currently rocking Considering Cast, because we don't worry about cast speed here, but that's 25% more damage. That's multiplicative, 1.25x. I've taken Inevitable Critical to try and see if giving crits on the Frostbomb's any good. It may well be that we'll move this on to Comet later on. Second Wind is also very, very good for Frostbombs. It allows us to do 2 of them. So you're not going to use this all the time. You're going to use it at specific instances. So you want to make it so when you do use it, you can just plant down 2 of them at the same time. So we've taken Spell Cascade off here because we're going to use it elsewhere. But this is still quite good for single target bosses and such. So that's why I've got it there. Frostball's still in the build. We're taking that along with Spell Echo because we can spawn 2 of them all up at once. This is very, very good on bosses which have a big enough hitbox that you can plant it under their feet. Icicle here, which gives it 50% life in the ice crystals, making it easier to blow them up and get the shatter damage from the icicles. And Font of Mana here, I'm using right now because it just gives me an extra 40% mana regeneration when they are alive. Later on, we can possibly take this off in favor of something more damage-based or utility-based. But for now, I've got this on because it's helping me stay alive a bit better and just generally chill while I'm going through the maps. Cast on Freeze, as everyone keeps saying is dead, is not dead, guys. I will iterate that. For sure, it has definitely been nerfed, and for sure, Comet is much, much harder to activate with this now. But what I've decided to try out, and it works surprisingly well with my setup, is Ball Lightning. We'll go into exactly why, but the premise of it is these activate and spawn much more often. And in conjunction with Scatter Shot, every time it fires one, it fires 3 of them, which means you've got 3 of them flying through the screen. You can end up with many instances of this. And really, the reason we want to use this is because of where we're going to come to with Lightning Warp in a moment. The more of those we've got, the better. The more we can stomp about on the screen at free and create stupid amounts of shock, which is absolutely, it's super, super fun. I've just got to work out how to scale the damage on it. And we're currently taking Impetus because that increases the energy gained, which just means that we can activate Ball Lightning more often. Later on, there's a couple others we could take, which would increase the energy utility and maybe improve Ball Lightning further. But for now, this is working reasonably well. We'll go to Hypothermia in a moment because where we've just gone with Cast on Freeze with Ball Lightning, we should probably go to Lightning Warp next. Lightning Warp, if you don't know what it does, every time an enemy is low on life enough to be cold, this will allow you to jump on them and cold them, and it will place shocked ground at their feet. Or you can cast it on a Ball Lightning projectile. And this is where it gets very important. The more Ball Lightnings that are on screen, the more you can spam cast Lightning Warp all over the screen like a Telestomp build and apply shock ground everywhere. And if you can scale this damage later on, it would end up just obliterating the screen whilst applying Shocked. And Shocked makes you do more damage to enemies. That in conjunction with Overcharge gives you 75% increased magnitude of shocks inflicted by this skill. And because it's shocked ground, it just keeps applying shock to those enemies. So you just get really, really strong versions of shock. We've taken Soul Drain, so when you coal an enemy, you get 12% of your mana back over 4 seconds. Super nice when you're playing the Mind Over Matter Eldritch battery setup. And I've currently put Unleash in here because it means if there's multiple instances of cold enemies to be cold at once, then it will, or multiple balls to jump on, it will just do them all at once and jump you across the screen without you having to constantly cast it. So that's super nice. Coming back into Hypothermia, this is our bread and butter curse for reducing their resistances. I really only use this on big targets most of the time. I'm not automating it just now, but you can absolutely do that if you would like. So we take a magnified effect for extra area effects. We've taken Curse Ground because this allows us to make it constantly apply on the floor, but it can only be there can only be one of them at a time. But it also means there's no activation time, which is how we're bypassing the double activation delay from Whispers of Doom key passive. And then on top of this, Ritualistic Curse goes extremely well with Curse Ground because where this would normally increase the delay, again, we have no delay. So it just gives us a 50% extra area effect for free. So that's super nice, and this is very good for just helping us do extra damage. And one thing to note is this will allow you to do multiplicative more damage to an enemy and make them go below 0% resistances, whilst penetration will not. Reduction to curse reduction to resistances will. So this is useful regardless of how much resistance they've got left. Next to note is Eye of Winter. You get this at level 52. You can use this as an offensive option. This I know can do lots and lots of damage. I'm still playing around with the support gems on here, but the most important one for me here is Pierce. This allows when all the projectiles go out for the projectiles to pierce through enemies. Then the next important one is Cold Exposure. You're probably going to be critting enough with this, with enough of these out, that you're going to end up applying exposure to everything all over the screen. So that's just going to be super nice for applying Cold Exposure everywhere. And I've currently put Cold Penetration in just so it can do a bit more damage. But I feel like maybe going utility with Eye of Winter in this build is better than damage, because we're doing most of our damage with other skills elsewhere. We are still using Comets in this build, but we're doing it as a manual cast instead. And the reason for that is if you manage to get yourself in a situation where you've walled off your enemies and you just want to clear the screen and you've got enough cast speed so you can cast Comet quick enough, then Comet is actually still very strong. I've currently got the extra +1 to supported cold skills in here just to increase the damage of it. I've got Spell Cascade on it so that it does an area effect around the area you cast it. This isn't so great for single target, but it means if you've got a huge group of enemies lined up, you can just blast them all around. A bit like what the old cast on Freeze Comet tech used to do, except you're manually casting it now with a slight delay before. And Arcane Tempo here just helps you get that cast speed up by reducing, by giving you 25% more cast speed, reducing that cast time quite significantly. So far this seems to be working okay. This may change as we go, but for now I might play into the critical tech on Comet to see if we can up the Comet's damage, but for now it's more about casting the Comets quickly than it is doing big damage with any single one at a time, and that's what I've tried to go for. The only other thing to mention here is, as I said before, if you can get enough spirit, so you need 120 minimum, but 130 would be ideal. You can play with Blasphemy, which allows you to put curses on and they become an aura, at the cost of them being 44% weaker. The importance here is this allows you again to bypass the activation delay on your curse, allowing you to have 2 curses with Whisper of Doom without having any activation delay. Enfeeble is very good here because it makes all enemies do less damage to you, and that's just super, super handy whilst you're going around and getting close with them with a telestomp. And later on, you're going to want to scale the area effects of this as much as possible, and with all of the extra passives you can get, you can scale the potency of this back up, so it's working for you a bit better. But for now, I've taken Expanse because that just gives us 50% more area without the cooldown worries, and I've put on Clarity because that works while the skill is active, which it is, and that gives us 30% extra mana regen. Later on you might not need this, but earlier on this is absolutely very useful indeed. In terms of equipment, I have by no means got perfect gear here, and I'm only using one unique, but I'll quickly run over what I've got so far, guys, and then I can tell you roughly what I'm trying to strive towards as we get there as well. So for now, I have got this very basic wand here. It's got 3 to all cold spells, cast speed, and mana. We want mana on every piece of gear we can, and the more of it we can get, the better, because this will scale our damage, it will scale our mana regeneration, it will scale our cast speed, and it will scale our damage. So we just want mana absolutely everywhere. That is beyond, other than movement speed on your boots, is the most important stat. So I'm definitely going to be looking for a better weapon here, but this is not bad. If you can get something like this, this will carry you all the way through to the end game and beyond. Next, we've got the helm. Every piece of armor and equipment piece of gear that you can get energy shield on, you want to stack as much energy shield as possible secondary to maximum mana. You treat energy shield as basically extra maximum mana here, because you're using Eldritch Battery converting all of this energy shield into maximum mana. So I've got plus 77 maximum mana here and 78 energy shield. So that means I've actually got 155 maximum mana, again playing into my damage, mana regeneration, cast speed, and health pool. So bear that in mind when I'm going across all the gear. That is where I've focused. Other than that, we've got resistances here. Any resistance is super useful. We're just trying to cap our resistances as we go. On the focus, again, just focused on energy shield, maximum mana. I'm lucky enough to have got 1 all spell skills here. Cast speed is very, very helpful in your gear as well. You want as much cast speed as possible until you get to a certain point. I've kind of hit a point where my cast speed is very nice. More is better, but I feel like I should be working on on different stats now instead. And if you can get a high roll mana regeneration rate on your focus, then that's super useful as well. I've currently got 58% here. That could have gone to 59, but I think you can get higher than that on a higher ranked version of that stat. Going to the chest piece, you really want to get as high an energy shield here as possible. You can see I've got 312 with quality 20. This is super strong. You want spirit on your chest piece if you can, because that will allow you to get beyond the 100 spirit from the story campaign, allowing you to use blasphemy along with cast on freeze. If you can get a really nice amount of spirit, you can also put on mana remnants later on as well, which will just give you extra mana sustain, but that's definitely very end game. And beyond that, you just want as many resistances as possible here, because I don't think you can get maximum mana on a chest piece, and you need to make up these resists somewhere. Gloves, again, just energy shield, resistances, maximum mana. You're getting the picture here, guys. It's pretty much the same across all the pieces of gear. Boots, movement speed is absolutely key stat number 1. Then it's energy shield. Intelligence is good because that gives you 2 mana per intelligence. And then resistance is here. Very, very nice. These are all super nice stats. Going to the rings, resistances, max mana, cast speed. Any of those are good. I've got a level 8 ring here, which I'm struggling to replace just because it's got cast speed and a resist on it. It's actually quite expensive for me to replace this, but it absolutely could be replaced with something better. There is also a unique ring, which is one of the Brotherhood rings, as shown in the image. This will convert all damage from lightning into cold. This could be very useful for the build, but I haven't got one yet. When I get one, I will test it out, and maybe this will play extremely well with this variant of the build, with the lightning balls and stuff. So I will update as I know, guys. In terms of the amulet, this is one of the best items I've got, to be honest. It's got an enormous amount of max mana on it, plus percentage increased max mana. These are both extremely good for this build. You can get plus all skills on here if you're lucky enough, which I haven't got. You can get spirit on here if you're lucky enough, which I haven't got. And then just resistances, guys. And if you can get chaos resistance anywhere, that will help you not die to poison damage like I'm struggling with right now. I haven't got to the point where we can equip chaos inoculation yet, which would allow you to make yourself immune to chaos damage, but at the cost of making your life 1. Maybe later on when you get enough mana pool, you can do this, but I haven't got to that point yet. The one unique I'm using, and I've left that to last because this is pretty important. If you're going to go for both Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery, you probably want to try and get hold of one of these belts, the Midnight Braid. And the reason for that is it gives you 50% of your damage taken recouped as mana. So that's on top of the 20 in your passive tree. Well, you can get 30 in your passive trees if you want to go to both clusters. That gives you 70 or 80% of all your damage taken recouped as mana, as extra regeneration. So it just gives you a huge amount of sustain as you're playing when you're playing the full mana health pool tech. If you don't have this, you'll probably find you're a bit squishy. It will work, but I would absolutely recommend trying to get hold of one of these, and you can probably pick one up on the trade site pretty cheap. But I haven't checked recently how much they are. I wouldn't expect them to be crazy expensive though. For the charm, I'm using a thawing charm because I really don't like being frozen. I find this to be the worst of all of the crowd controls. You can use the anti-stun one as well, but I would recommend using the freeze one here. And we've just got the best life and mana potions we've been able to find. In terms of weapon set 2, honestly, I haven't really played into it much. I've got a very basic staff here. Maybe later on I will try and specialize into a curse set of weapons. So when I curse, I do better weapon damage. I can apply better curse damage and stuff. But for now, I'm kind of just using my weapon set 1 mostly. So as you can see, my gear is by no means absolutely insane. Most of it is roughly around the level or lower than what I've got. I've got some very good pieces of gear here, but there is massive room for improvement, especially when it comes to the maximum mana scaling. I could easily get my mana to 4,000 or beyond here with the gear alone. And that's about it for the build, guys. If you want to check out the build planner in the description, this will give you much more detail into how the build goes together leveling up. And there'll be an endgame variant, which I'll be updating as I play. I'm by no means done with this build yet, so I will absolutely be looking to update this. I'll be trying to solve the boss damage. I'll be looking into things such as Archmage with the Brotherhood ring, which might scale our damage into Cataclysm with the mana stacking, and so on and so on. There's plenty of different ideas I've got. This is just where I've got to it now. I've managed to do a waypoint here 4 or 5 on the end game, so it's not very high, like super high, but it is easily mapping in its current state. And if you want to come and ask any questions, I do stream live on Twitch and YouTube, so be sure to check out the links in the description and come and check out when I'm live. And with that in mind, guys, keep safe, and I'll check you out in the next one.